So today is the fourth edition of the World Logic Day, and we have this celebration of the Logica Universalis Association, and organized within the Logica Universalis webinar that we have started since last year. And then Katarzyna Gan-Krzywoszynska will be the chair of the session. Please, Katarzyna.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the central celebration of the fourth World Logic Day. On January 14, we celebrate World Logic Day, the birthday of Alfred and death of Kurt Gödel. The first World Logic Day was organized on January 14, 2019. It started with 60 locations all over the world. Let me briefly remind you the history of the World Logic Day. We owe this to Jean-Yves Beziau, who presented the detailed report in order for World Logic Day to be a World UNESCO Day in April 2019 in Paris, to the ambassador of Brazil at UNESCO, María Edileuza Fontenelle Reis. After the approval by the Brazilian government, the ambassador presented the proposal during the meeting of the UNESCO Executive Council, and then backed by 17 other countries, it was approved on October 2019 and became official part of the calendar of UNESCO International Days. So already on January 14, 2020, the second World Logic Day was organized under auspices of UNESCO. After two successful editions organized by the Logica Universalis Association, LUA, and the third edition was managed by UNESCO through CIPSH, Conseil International de Philosophie et des Sciences Humaines, and LUA, and it was organized a welcome celebrations that most of you participated. And here we are for this fourth edition. We are having a roundtable on the topic of exceptionality of logic with the following 7 invited speakers: Jean-Yves Beziau, Yuri Gurevich, María del Rosario Martínez-Ordaz, Srecko Kovac, Jan Volensky, István Németi and Hajnal Andreka, and Mihir Chakraborty. And the session will run as follows. It has 3 main parts. First part is each participant of the roundtable will speak for maximum 10 minutes. After that, the second part, there will be a discussion between the members of the table, maximum 20 minutes. And then we will have a general discussion with the audience, so all of you will have a chance to ask the question. So let me briefly present our first speaker, Jean-Yves Beziau. His current affiliation is Brazilian Academy of Philosophy, CNPq, and University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He's founder and editor-in-chief of the journal Logica Universalis and the book series Studies in Universal Logic, founder and organizer of the series of events Unilog, Square of Oppositions, Logic in Question, and World Congresses on Logic and Religion. He's editor of Logic area of the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, founder and organizer of the project A Prize of Logic in Every Country, and the president of the Logica Universalis Association. And by the way, the author of the forthcoming, yet you already may read it online, article on the exceptionality of logic. Jean-Yves, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I will share the screen. Is it working?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I will make a very short presentation about the exceptionality of logic. It's a paper I recently wrote. And 5 reasons why logic is exceptional today. This is the title of my presentation. Okay. So first of all, I think it's very important to make a distinction between the different uses of the word logic. We can make a distinction between logic as reasoning, I use a capital L for that, and logic as a science of reasoning. It's very important to make the difference between the two. And when I'm using lambda, It's because it can be interpreted in the two ways. This is generally what people are doing, but this can lead to some confusion. This graphical differentiation, I did this differentiation by inspiration with what is going on in history. So history with a big H is a series of events of humanity, and the history with a small h is a science of these events. This difference with small and big letter is not in English, French, and over many different languages. So this is a very special situation because it's happened also with history, but it's not the case in biology. For example, we are talking about the science of living beings. And so the name of the topic is not the same as the name of the science. The same with linguistics, even if the two words are quite similar. But language, there are some different languages, and linguistics is a science of the study of these languages. So having made this distinction, let me present the first reason why I think the first in the order, but also because it's more important. The first reason why we can consider that logic is exceptional is because it's a characterizing feature of human beings. Since the ancient Greece, the ancient time in Greece, the human beings were characterized as rational animals. Originally in Greek is logical animal, but it was translated in Latin, so rational nowadays we are talking about rational animal. But the word is logic. Originally the word is logic. So logic is what characterizes human beings as reasoning and also as a science of reasoning. So we can say that logic as reasoning is something exceptional because only human beings can really perform reasoning. And human beings, for this reason, are themselves exceptional. That's the first reason. And we can say, concerning this, we can say that the World Logic Day is indeed the celebration of humanity, because logic is what is characterizing humanity. And due to some circumstances that Tarski was born January 14 and Gödel died on January 14, we decided to choose this day. And now it's the first day, it's the first celebration in the calendar of UNESCO. And also it's the first day of the year in the Julian calendar, which is a calendar which was put forward by Julius Caesar. During 15th century, it was used, and it's still used by people from the Orthodox Church. The second reason why we can say that logic is exceptional is because of the interplay between logic and metalogic. So there is a constant interaction between the two. I give just one example. Here we can apply the theory of opposition, here's the hexagon of opposition, to understand, to have a better understanding of the quantifiers. So the theory of opposition is a logical theory, and the theory of quantifier is also a logical theory. The third reason of exceptionality is the interdisciplinarity of logic. So logic is interacting with many other different fields. So we have logic, philosophy, mathematics, computation, semiotics. And as you can see, and also there are also applications of logic to many other fields like physics and economics, law, and so on. But I'm talking here more about the interaction. So the interaction, in the sense that it's not only application, there is action in both ways, in both directions. So it's clear that it is what is going on in mathematics since the development of modern logic. With computation also it's very clear, and with semiotics we know also that especially this was put forward by Peirce, which considers that semiotics was very important as well as logic. Now there is another aspect which is connected with interdisciplinarity, but it's a bit different, is what we can call transdisciplinarity. Transdisciplinarity. So what is transdisciplinarity? This word was coined by Jean Piaget at the beginning of the 70s. And for him, transdisciplinarity, everything is clear by this diagram here. Transdisciplinarity is more than interdisciplinarity because it's something which is above interdisciplinarity, and something which is transdisciplinar. It's a kind of new science, which is in some sense encompassing all science. This was the idea of Mathesis Universalis as promoted by Descartes and also Leibniz. But I think it makes more sense to consider that this transdisciplinarity, if there is a transdisciplinarity, science, I think it makes more sense to consider that it's logic itself. All right. Now the fifth and last reason is connected with universality, because we are using this expression universal logic. And why universal? And it was used, universal was used also in the expression of Mathesis Universalis. What does it mean exactly? Well, universal, it means, from the etymological point of view, unification to the one. So it's a unification of diversity. But this word also is very much used, is used mainly today to speak about the universe. So universe, this is where we are living. It's considered the word universe is used as a synonym to reality in some sense. And logic helps us to understand what is the universe by reasoning about it. There is here two interesting quotes, one by Gödel and one by Einstein. So the first quote by Gödel expresses the limitation of logic due to his own incompetence theorem, and the second, but even if we consider this limitation, we still have the possibility to understand the world, even if it's not mechanically, but we are not machine. We are happy not to be machine. So that's it. So here, just remember the journal Logica Universalis. The name was inspired by analogy with universal algebra and the Logica Universalis Association. Thank you. I will stop sharing the screen.
Thank you very much, Jean-Yves. And our second speaker is Yuri Gurevich, former principal researcher in Microsoft Research, professor emeritus at the University of Michigan in the United States, keynote speaker at the 4th Unilog in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 2013. Yeah, I give voice to Yuri Gurevich.
Thank you, Katarzyna. I have a very different view, but first let me say Happy New Year to everybody, especially to those who start New Year about today, like many Orthodox people in Russia. So the question whether logic is exceptional or not seems to me rather easy. The answer is emphatic yes to both, exceptional and non-exceptional. The apparent contradiction is just that, apparent, because the relevant logic is not Boolean. I remember having a magnet on my fridge decades ago, and the magnet said, "Life is more complicated than you think, stupid." And it was there for years. Once I knocked it off, put back, apparently in reverse, and discovered that there is the other side, which said, life is simpler than you think, stupid. And both sounded profoundly true, with no contradiction, real contradiction between them. Why logic is exceptional? I actually see its exceptionality in different place. Engineering relies on physics. Physics relies on mathematics. Mathematics relies on logic. Logic relies on logic. It's sort of a bottom line. Now, why logic is not exceptional? So what are the exceptional among who? Among other disciplines, arts and sciences? Well, clearly mathematics is exceptional. And of course, physics is exceptional. And so is engineering. We have a little bias. Logicians think that logic is exceptional. Well, would you be surprised that physicists think that physics is exceptional? Even in its narrow field as a science of reasoning or a discipline of reasoning, logic has competitors. So if you think about logic as a science of convincing argument, then one competitor is the rhetoric. A kind of deductive logic, which we're mostly familiar with, which one is so successful in mathematics, is not that useful in normal life. I think rhetoric will take you much farther. Maybe I'll finish with that, and if I have a chance, I'll try to explain why I think mathematics is special. Okay. Katarzyna, back to you.
Yeah, you have still, so in the discussion, we will continue with mathematics, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to our third speaker, María de Rosario Martínez-Ordaz, postdoctoral fellow at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, currently visiting scholar at the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun, Poland. She is a coordinator of the project LógicaMX, and she was a keynote speaker at the 6th Union in Vichy, France, 2018. María, please.
Thank you, Katarina. Thank you, everybody, and happy Logic Day to everybody, wherever you are. I am a philosopher of science, and so my standpoint about the exceptionality or not exceptionality of logic comes from there. So, if for those who might not remember this debate very well. Initially, the problem with the exceptionality of logic started with two standpoints. On the one hand, some people like Wittgenstein argue that logic is exceptional in the sense that it is a very unique type of enterprise, epistemic enterprise for humans that does not connect, or it's not related to the other scientific disciplines, especially the empirical sciences. On the other hand, you have the anti-exceptionalist people who are going to claim that actually logic is very similar to other scientific disciplines in methodology, in epistemology, and in other aspects related to truth and how we assess truth in logic, or the type of truths that we embrace in logic that are similar to the physical ones, for instance, and so on. And so people that hold this view started with Quine, and recently you can find these stand positions in both classical views on logic, such as Timothy Williamson's, and non-classical, such as Graham Priest's. And so this idea of the exceptionality of logic for philosophers of science is mostly related to either there is a continuum between physical sciences or there is not a continuum between physical sciences and logic and other scientific disciplines. And so with that in mind, there are at least three different contexts in which we can find this relation, or we can deny that this relation actually holds. And the first one is more metaphysical or ontological, and it might be one of the first intuitions that people like Russell had when they embraced anti-exceptionalism, and it says something like the following: the ontology that we posit in logic or the metaphysical commitments that we hold in logic are very similar to the ones that physicists hold in physics or other scientists hold in these particular disciplines. And so they are not saying that the metaphysical or ontological reality of logic is the same necessarily as the physical one, but that the relation that holds between what we posit that exists in logic is very similar to the one that we say that we identify in our world. So people like the structuralist, scientific structuralist will adopt that similar view, saying that logic actually helps us to structure or to find a structure that is behind reality, for instance. So that's the most committed relation that you can find in the anti-exceptionalist view, that this anti-exceptionalist relation is either ontological or metaphysical, or can be found in the metaphysical realm. Another context in which we can defend this view is epistemology. And either we can say that for us, the truths of logic are equally justified or similarly justified as the truths that we hold in physics or in other scientific disciplines. And so our commitments, at least for us, look the same. And there is another view in epistemology in which we can say that the epistemic practices that logicians hold are very similar to the ones that are held in physics, in chemistry, and other scientific disciplines. Finally, there is the view that regardless how you think about ontology in logic or epistemology in logic, you can say that the methodology is the same. And so, or at least very similar in an important sense. Evidence plays the same role, applicability plays the same role, strength plays the same role. And this is like in science, when you find a theory that it's very clearly applicable in particular domains, it has successful results, then you commit to it strongly, and that's a methodological criterion. And so in the case of logic, what has happened in the last decades is that this methodological context has been clearly emphasized in this debate. So anti-exceptionalists would say that when you find a domain of application for a particular logical theory, then that applicability justifies us to be committed more to that logical theory than to its rivals. And this is a position that, as I was saying, often is held by either classical logicians such as Timothy Williamson or Graham Priest in the non-classical side of the debate. And so this gives us the idea that at least in that sense, logic is very much similar to the sciences because we use similar criteria to evaluate either the success or the failure of our theories. As we do in physics, we do in logic. And so, as I was saying, the large majority of attention has focused in that sense, in that particular context, the methodological one. And the argument goes more or less as follows. So there is a continuum. The main assumption for the anti-exceptionalist is that there is a continuum between physical sciences and, in the methodological sense at least, and logic. And the criteria that have been useful for the study and explanation of scientific practices, such as theory choice, is going to be very useful when we address the same issues in logic. Why do we prefer paraconsistent logics in these cases over classical logics, for instance? And so some of that criterion is evidence, applicability, and the relation that these two have in acceptance. One of the main cases or the most salient cases that illustrate how logicians commit to this view is found in discussions on logical pluralism. So either we find a lot of evidence in order to choose different logics in different contexts, or we find only evidence in favor of one logical theory. And so the discussion is there, but ideally the assumption is that the methodological criterion that are useful in sciences are going to be useful for solving this issue. Now, there is a particular case in which we can think that even if we are anti-exceptionalist, logic is going to be exceptional in the epistemological sense. And this one is in the sense of revealing practices, epistemic practices. So what often happens is that we move from science to logic. We take the lessons that as philosophers of science we have learned in the empirical sciences, and we move to say which of those lessons are going to help us to understand logic in a better sense. But something that has not happened, at least not recently, is that we move in the opposite direction. So the lessons that we have already about the explicit practices that we hold in logic can be useful for revealing the implicit practices, epistemic practices that we have in sciences. Some of these practices are going to be related to the identification of certain inferential patterns. So logic is mostly about inference according to different views, but the attention that we pay to inference is clearer, or at least more explicit in logic than we have it in the sciences. When we look at the problems that we have in philosophy of science for explaining certain practices, we are going to find out that we don't get a lot of grasp of generality. So when we talk about inconsistent reasoning, for instance, we say why we, in particular cases, tolerate inconsistencies, but we cannot give a proper recipe for the broader cases or the families of cases. But this can come easily from logic. When we say why we can understand or we can talk sensibly about inconsistent or trivial theories or very defective theories or models, in the sciences, we often go to particular assumptions that are there, but we cannot give a general recipe of why an inconsistent theory is sensibly to us, why an inconsistent or trivial theory can be understood by humans, and so on and so forth. But this can be easily solved if we pay attention to what logicians are doing, which is identifying inference patterns, identifying inferential structures. And we move that explanation to the sciences, and we are going to be able to provide broader and more robust explanations of why scientists and humans are going to be able to reason within a particular type of defective information. And why can we not only reason with it, but we can achieve other epistemic goods such as explanation, such as understanding, and so on and so forth. So one of the lessons that we can learn from relating logic and the sciences is that, well, we can be anti-exceptionalist about the relation that holds between them. We can also be exceptionalist about the types of knowledge that we can gain in the sciences from the knowledge that we have already gained in logic, and how this can help us to understand better which are the epistemic practices that scientists are holding, and maybe also take back that knowledge back to logic and reveal new aspects of logic, as we have been doing already in that direction. And those are my only thoughts that I have at this moment. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. And now our next speaker is Srecko Kovac from Institute of Philosophy, Zagreb, Croatia, president of the Croatian Logic Association, organizer of the Georgius Benignus Croatian Prize in Logic. Please.
Thank you very much, and many thanks for this invitation. I'm trying to share the screen. I hope it can be seen.
Yes.
So, and of course, a happy New Year and a happy Logic Day. And just to say in advance, I would like to apologize if, unfortunately, I believe about 5:30 because I should moderate Roundtable in Croatia. So I would like to say a few words about the interrelation between logic and philosophy. Let us take, for the beginning, a broader view historically. We can say that logic makes the transition from myth to philosophy. On the ground of Plato's dialogues, we can see that Apollo is considered the mythical father of philosophy. Apollo is the god of self-knowledge and oracles of arts and harmony, healing, archery. Let us take a look at the following quotation from Plato. the soul can receive no benefit from any teachings offered to it until someone, by refuting, reduces him who is refuted to an attitude of modesty by removing the opinions that obstruct the teachings, and thus purges him and makes him think that he knows only what he knows and no more. So we see refutation as playing a key role in this transition. And this self-knowledge is based, of course, on logic. In the following quotation, we have an early account of the principle of non-contradiction. As Plato writes, in their discussions, philosophers collect those opinions and compare them with one another, and by the comparison, they show that they contradict one another about the same things, in relation to the same things, and in respect to the same things. As we can see, refutation involves here in Plato the principles of contradiction and of excluded middle. The principles of contradiction, sufficient reason, and excluded middle are essential for philosophical concepts. They all can be read of, for example, in Beziau's hexagon of Kant's concept. We have seen it a couple of minutes ago in Jean-Yves' presentation. We can start from the concept of analytic in the diagram, which is understood as that which is known by formal logic. Then, by logical principles, we can obtain the other concepts in this hexagon. Contradiction is in the center of the hexagon between A and O, and between E and I points. Sufficient reason is on the edges of the hexagon. It is subalternation, and the middle is excluded by contradiction. There is nothing in the center of the diagram, but included in contraries and sub-contraries. We see neither between A and E points in the diagram, and both between I and O in the diagram. Starting from this logical principle of contradiction, sufficient reason, and excluded middle, Kant obtains model concepts of possibility, actuality, and necessity, both in the logical and the real sense. Real sense meaning in relation to what is given extra-logically to our sensual intuition. But in the logical sense, possibility is not contradictoriness, it is groundedness in reasons. Necessity is exclusion and or exclusion by logical principles. And further, correspondingly to these concepts and to these three principles, Kant obtains the concepts of subject, which should not be contradicted by any predicate, which should be predicated to this subject, antecedent as the reason of its consequence, and whole as exhausting its parts. And further, in relation to extra logical givenness in sensual intuition, Kant obtains also categories of substance, of cause, and mutual influence. It is interesting that the correspondent of these fundamental concepts can be found also in extensional set theoretical settings. In three, in a way, particular axioms of ZFC, axiomatic theory of set theory. For example, first, the axiom scheme of separation requires a subject set as already given, to which the predication of phi is applied. So Z is a member of X and phi holds. Secondly, axiom scheme of collection and equivalent alternative to the axiom scheme of replacement requires a set theoretic conceptualization of consequence, W member of what, for a given reason, phi in the middle of the axiom scheme. And so X can be understood as a subject, phi a middle term, and Y a predicate in a hypothetical proposition, which need not be understood as a, say, material conditional of propositional logic. This can be exemplified by the following example of a hypothetical proposition in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, in the following way. If Z is a ball, X, then if the ball is put, this is phi, on some place in a stuffed pillow, then there is a dent, Y. This is this perceptualization of the concept. Then there is a dent, Y, on a place in a stuffed pillow where the ball is put. And thirdly, axiom of choice, as is known, proves the principle of excluded middle, as we know from Iaconescu's theorem from 1975. And finally, a logical system, formal system, is understood and defined by Turing and Gödel as a machine for writing theorems. For doing a deductive work, descriptions and learning are needed. So we should learn a deductive system, its rules, axioms, and so on. But schemata of rules and theorems, at least partly, speak for themselves. So the question can be asked, how is it possible that we understand logical schemes and forms? Here we are, one picture, one scheme, and one example in a formalized logical language. The picture is taken from a book possessed by Wittgenstein, Machine Nove by Faust Vrančić, where we can see a human hanging on a parachute, which hangs on or in the air. And hence we also see this human as hanging on or in the air. Quite similarly, in the middle, we see Kant's scheme of a syllogism. In Kant's wording, S subject is hanging on M, which is hanging on P, and by itself we see that S is hanging on P. And on the right side, we have a formula in Frege's conceptual language, Begriffsschrift. It is actually an axiom of propositional logic. Read from bottom up, it says, if C, then if B, then A, then if C, then B, then if C, then A. So it seems we can conclude that logic is not separated from our intuitions, and that it belongs, in Wittgenstein words, to our forms of life as a fixed point of our real need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Jan Woleński. Current affiliation is University of Information Technology and Management, Rzeszów, Poland. He is the best specialist of the Lvov Warsaw School and of Alfred Tarski, and among so many other things, keynote speaker at the Second World Congress on the Second Unilog in Xi'an, China, 2007, and Second World Congress on Logic and Religion in Warsaw, 2017, and was invited speaker, let me add, at 2 World Congresses on Analogy in Puebla, Mexico, and Poznan, Poland in 2017. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for invitation. I don't know what is exceptionality in this context. However, I will say something about particular features of logic. And if Tarski was mentioned, so I will refer to his paper about logical consequence, published in 1936. And he says that assume that every word would be a logical constant. And if so, every material conditional would be a logical theorem. Material true conditional, strictly speaking, and certainly we don't know, we don't like to have such a situation. So logic is a device in order to distinguish logical theorems from materially true conditionals, and in how it works. So one of definitions of logic, or a definition suggested by Tarski's axiomatization of consequence operation, is that a logic is a set of consequences of the empty set. It is a very strange definition for first look, because it suggests that we have something which is created ex creatio ex nihilo. Maybe for religious reason there are some such possibilities, but of course not from human point of view. However, an equivalent definition is that logic belongs to set of consequences of every set. It means that in order to define logic, no special assumptions are necessary. Now, if you have axioms for general axioms for consequence operations, the deduction theorem doesn't matter whether your logic is classical or not. You can define such a logic as just the set of consequences of the empty set. Now, and this shows that logic is really very universal or extremely universal. And if you have completeness theorem, it means that logic is true in every domain, in every model, speaking semantically. However, of course, there are some doubts, because one can say, as Jean-Yves did, that, well, you have metalogic, so you must do something via metalogic, so define consequence operation and several other things, and you will get this definition which I quoted. Maybe yes, maybe not. So maybe that now we need something to be in the domain of metalogy in order to describe logic. There's no other way. So according to several metalogical theorems, metalogic must be richer than logic itself. So yes, so logic requires at least some metalogical assumptions. But in this case, in this sense, logic is not exceptional, because there is no domain, as Yuri said, of human activity which is free of any assumption. So now what about this logic as reason? It is a faculty of some I would say, I don't like to say human beings, but maybe this is a general property of living organism. So you don't know whether logic is completely absent in non-human beings. However, what is interesting that this logic doesn't need any metalogical assumptions. So it simply works. It is a problem how to explain working of this faculty, which is certainly most developed in the case of humans, but maybe that some hybrid creatures will be even more logical than we are. Who knows? At the moment, of course, we are, so to speak, maximally logical being. However, it is interesting how this faculty evolved. Certainly, it is a product of biological evolution. And I have a hypothesis that evolution produced a special device in order to protect information against diversity. What does it mean? That logical reasoning, logical consequence prevents possessed information against dispersion. And I think that is a function of logic. Of course, what is on the level of biology? I read a book about topology of DNA, and in this book, I don't remember authors at the moment. There's several arguments that genetic information is transmitted not arbitrarily, but via some topological closures, which are very similar to consequence operation. So it seems that on the level of genetic working, there is a device which is mathematically described by topological closure operation, which by us is linguistically or logically or theoretically displayed by the operation Cn. So we have a parallel between logic as reason and logic as a theory. And two final remarks. There is one correction. At the beginning of your paper, there is information that over the world, logical departments are rather very rare because logicians are appointed as philosophers or mathematicians. There is one exception, namely Poland. We have several logical departments. Even some universities have two departments, one at mathematical faculty, other philosophical faculty. And it is nothing new, because in the interwar period, Poland had 5 professorships in mathematical logic and informal logic. And if you are interested how many were outside Poland, answer is very simple, only one, namely in Minster. So Poland is in a sense an exceptional country as far as the issue concerns logical department. And second remark is that also we should distinguish so-called logic sensu largo and logic sensu stricto. And this is a problem. The nature of logic sensu largo, the semiotics and methodology of science or philosophy of science is much more problematic than logic as a deductive theory, and if people are puzzled, as you say, about logic, they expect too much, because they expect that logic will help them in doing science, for example. It is a very risky assumption. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next speakers are István Németi and Hajnal Andreka from Alfred Renyi Institute of Mathematics, Hungarian Academy of Sciences, Budapest, Hungary. And let me just add his cooperation with Tarski himself. They are both members of the editorial board of Logica Universalis and studies in Universal Logic. Please.
Hi everyone, on this celebration of the 4th World Logic Day.
Hi everyone.
And first, logic is clearly exceptional because we have World Logic Day and very few things have World Days. So in this respect, logic is really exceptional and it is great that we have this World Logic Day. We will have 4 slides, and on the first slide we will try to clarify a little bit what we mean by logic and being exceptional. Okay, do you see the slides? Okay, so we begin on a big time, consciousness. So clearly, consciousness is something that's very mystical and very important thing. Only highly evolved living things are conscious so far as we know. This may change with the artificial intelligence, but anyway, it seems that the essence of consciousness is separation of self, of me, from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world can be called outer world. Now, living a very effective way of survival is that a living thing may make an internal model of the outer world in itself and try to make internal experiments on this internal model using usually a language with semantics. Language that has meaning, and then information about the outer world and about this experimenting with the internal world can be stored in text of this language. And of course, we need tools to manipulate, organize, reorganize, pack into neat small boxes, knowledge, and then unpack these things. So we need some tools for manipulate things. So information. In our understanding, as we think logic is a language with semantic plus some tools for processing information stored by means of this language. So this in this general way is that we look at logic. Now about exceptional. In this context, we usually just would mean, not always, something is exceptional in a context where there are many, where it is not just one of the many similar things. When there are many things, and of these many things, logic is in some way exceptional. Now, then let's see, and then in this consciousness thing that's very important for us, of course, for everyone, for our culture, logic is exceptional because I think there are not many things that connect the self with the outer world. Logic is really connects self with the outer world, and it is about this connection. So in this situation, we think that logic is exceptional. This is another way of saying that what Descartes said, that we think so, therefore we exist. Or what Beziau said, that these human things are reasoning things. So these manipulating information stored by means of the language can be called reasoning.
I think, therefore I exist.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's go to the next subject, science. Mathematics is really exceptional in science. Even Yuri said this. Why? Because science has many branches, but mathematics is not exactly like the other sciences. Mathematics is the language of all sciences, for example, or one can say that mathematics is the maid of science, that mathematics fulfills the need of any other sciences. So mathematics is exceptional in science. Okay. But then mathematics is based on an axiomatic set theory. And this axiomatic set theory is written in logic, of course. So somehow mathematics is based on logic. But what about logic? Logic is formalized in mathematics. So logic is based on mathematics. So there is a very close connection between mathematics and logic. In our university courses, we usually illustrate this idea with this picture. In Hungary, you can buy a soft cheese in this little box. Now we say that this round box is logic. In logic, you can axiomatize set theory, that is this little bear, and this picture about this little bear. And in set theory, you can build up logic. This is this little logic, this little round circle in the bear hand. And of course, this little bear also has a little cheese in his hand. So, and all the way down this way. So there is a circularity, that's why, between logic and set theory. However, no, this circularity can be resolved, but by means it doesn't mean a contradiction between logic. It doesn't mean any kind of contradiction. It just means that logic and set theory are very closely intertwined. Now, coming back to our subject, if mathematics is exceptional in science, then of course logic is exceptional in science too. So this is our first thought. And now we go even further. Our next slides will say that in this marriage, logic begins to outshine mathematics. So logic, in some sense, begins to be more important than mathematics. So this is universal logic, and here is the picture of mathematics. I hope Beziau doesn't mind that we borrowed his picture for this. So let's see, this is mathematics. And once upon a time, there were just very few and separate mathematical subjects like geometry and algebra, and then this and that. But with time, the number and the quality of this subject evolved. There become more and more subjects. One of these subjects was logic, the other one analysis, and so on. And then mathematics was just the collection of these subjects, and many subjects were relying on the other subjects. But as mathematics evolved more and more and more, these subjects begin having interplay with each other. Two subjects collapsed into one subject and new sense. So there were interpretations between these subjects, and
they grew intertwined.
There became more and more a network of theories, not just separate theories or not just a collection of theories, but logic organizes all these theories into one coherent thing. So mathematics nowadays is like this, and not just a collection of theories or not just even a network of theories. Mathematics is very much like a society and not just a collection of individual beings, or mathematics just like our human body is not just the collection of cells. It's just something, a new thing that transcends. Okay, so logic organized mathematics, something into a real being. That's mathematics. The same way, and this thing happens in small and big too. For example, universal algebra. In algebra, logic just made algebra into universal algebra, just the same way, because there were many branches of algebra set theory, Boolean algebra, but universal algebra is not just one new theory of algebra that is on top of that. Universal algebra speaks not about algebra, it speaks about structure. The main notion of universal algebra is structure. You can get any structure, it doesn't have to be an algebra, you can make homomorphic images, you don't have to know what homomorphism means between two groups or between two lattices. You will understand what homomorphism means between two arbitrary structures. So somehow universal algebra is just more than the essence or subject of algebra. They're the same way. Okay. Now we have universal algebra and universal logic in a way. We can put those together, and we can get universal algebraic logic. Now we ourselves consider ourselves as members of Tarski school, and what we are doing now, we are now just writing a book that's called Universal Algebraic Logic, and it wants to be somehow the furthering of Tarski's work on first-order logic in the framework of universal logic, of a very abstract kind of logic. Okay, now if we just go further. So we said that logic can organize mathematics into one coherent thing. And we think that potentially logic can do the same thing to physics what it did to mathematics. Why? Because physics, of course, physics talks about the outer world. It has different theories, relativity theory, quantum mechanics, and so on. These separate theories, and these talk about reality. That with time, the theories of physics talk about smaller and smaller things and about bigger and bigger things. The subject of physics becomes something that we cannot touch as clearly as we can touch a table. We cannot touch an atom or an electron. So this means that an electron and an atom, those are more and more abstract things and not concrete like a thing. So it is not very clear what an experiment about an electron say. It's not so clear what an experiment about a table say. So in physics, I think it is a problem how to interpret the results of experiments, how to interpret what a physical theory says about the real outer world. And we think that logic can help in this respect, because your logic can organize these different theories of physics into one coherent being, these interplaying with each other, and in this interplaying network of physics would say much clearer things about the outer world than than just one theory can say. Okay, so we think that logic is able to do this to physics, and this would
At
be.
this point, I would like to point an example. If you are walking in the real world, you are walking around, and you are making judgment about objects, drop the object and do something. And then this experimenter then sees a lion and kicks the lion. Then it's quite obvious to see what the lion does. The lion usually turns around, bites the experimenter, and
Okay, so just
he makes conclusions on the basis of the experiment. But
yeah. So finishing this idea is that this would be the solution of Hilbert's sixth problem of axiomatizing physics. So this would be just axiomatizing the many theorems of physics in logic, and then of course the mechanics of logic can be used, making interpretations between these, and we already began humbly this thing by axiomatizing relativity theory. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now our last speaker, Mihir Chakraborty from Jadavpur University, West Bengal, India, coordinator of the Calcutta Logic Circle, organizer of the Bimbal Krishna Martilal Logic Prize, and keynote speaker in the Third World Congress on Square of Opposition in Beirut, Lebanon in 2012. Mihir, please. You have to unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes.
I first apologize for two things. First is that I was today, the whole day almost, I was busy with the World Logic Day celebration by Calcutta Logic Circle. So I'm feeling tired. And secondly, my pets are waiting for me. I'll have to feed them. So I will not be able to really participate in the discussion. I have a few sentences written, so I will read them, and I will please kindly excuse me for leaving the meeting just after this. Excuse me. And this is a quick response to Jean-Yves Beziau's article, which he sent me 2-3 days back. First point is this. In his article, Is Logic Exceptional? Jean-Yves Beziau introduces two words, logic with capital L and logic with small l. The first means reasoning, and the second, the science of reasoning, or the study of reasoning. More specifically, logic with small l is the same as equivalent to, it is according to him, system plus theory plus science, where by system we may take, for instance, syllogism, classical propositional calculus, or S5. These are his examples. By theory may be taken proof theory, model theory, recursion theory, etc. And by science, along with the first two, also to be included philosophy, history, and semiotics. Now, my remark in this connection is the following. It is unclear what is logic with capital L is. What logic with capital L is, since if it is a system, then the problem arises in that a system always includes a proof theory, Hilbert style or Gentzen style or of any other kind. In fact, without these pentalogical elements, the study of logic cannot proceed even one step. Without the notion of derivation, logic is undefined, and this derivation turnstile is a metalogical notion, and hence should be included in logic right from the beginning. Perhaps Beziau has meant the same thing. Besides, the notion of soundness, completeness, compactness, etc. are all metalogical notions. They should be placed in logic with small l. However, philosophy, history, etc. generally remain outside the above items, but I do agree with JYB that these are very important subjects generally ignored in the logic curriculum. At least in my country, it is so. This is point one. Point two, JYB argues that logic is exceptional. Already he has, presented that. So exceptional in 4 respects. Actually, he has mentioned 5. So I am not really, okay, let me read it out. That will be better. First point is that the way the 3 levels, namely system, theory, and science, are articulated. The interplay, it means the interplay between logic and metalogic. Number 2, interdisciplinarity of logic, that is its interaction with mathematics, computation, and philosophy. 3, transdisciplinarity of logic. I quote, modern logic is at the highest transdisciplinarity level, the product of an interaction of semiotics, computation, mathematics, and philosophy. 4, due to this double relational universal perspective, objective and subjective, this is another reason. And finally, what he started with today during his presentation, that is humans are called rational, or in bracket logical animals. Now, on these issues, I more or less agree. Basically, I agree with JYB, but my main disagreement lies in the following aspect of logic, and because of which I consider logic as most exceptional. So that is what I am now stating. That is number 3, third point, and last point. This is a subject, that means logic is a subject which is science and art both. Roughly 30% science and 70% art. Whether logic will be termed as a science of reasoning or art of reasoning is to be debated upon. I am more inclined towards the latter. That means I am more inclined towards it, considering it as an art. And because of this, it is greatly dependent on culture, that the reasoning practices vary in countries, in communities and cultures, has been widely researched. To say that logic is universal goes against reality, in my opinion. Of course, if one wants to treat logic as a normative device and the logic developed in the, let's say, for simplicity, West, as the only should be reasoning, should be the quote reasoning, I will refrain from argumentation. What I say is valid for the mathematical practices too. Jean-Yves Beziau has mentioned a parallel of, the parallel of language and linguistics. None of us would like to have just one language all over the world, though that would perhaps make our gross living, I say gross living, can be more convenient. Nor it is a fact that all cultures have the same linguistic theory. Great Indian thinker Bhartrihari may be remembered here. I am definitely not entering into what he said. It is different from the other linguistic theories. And naturally, as mentioned by Beziau, the brother-sister relationship between truth and proof breaks down. Gödel's theorem, he already mentioned his position. Theorem in this is a case for this. Logic now is not a truth seeker. Now means nowadays, is not a truth seeker. Rather, it preserves various kinds of qualities between premise and conclusion. Automatically, multiplicity, quote unquote multiplicity, and multiplicity is due to culture, due to the above mentioned quality to be preserved. Maybe other reasons also. So let me repeat, automatically multiplicity, which is not relativity, emerges. In my view, this is the uniqueness of logic. I would like to say something similar for mathematics too. In this regard, I quote the following from R.L. Wilder. The book is Introduction to the Foundations of Mathematics, and end my note. The quotation is the following. For mathematics, like other cultural entities, for mathematics is what it is as a result of collective human effort directed along evolutionary and diffusionary lines. And what it becomes will not be determined by the discovery of mathematical truth, now hidden from us, but by what mankind via cultural paths makes it. Wonderful mathematical practices prevailing in different cultures have been overpowered by brute forces and homogenized. There is nothing human in this kind of universalization. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I have to leave, and maybe some of you can send me some remarks on my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And in this way, Mihir started already the second part, I believe, of our celebration of the fourth World Logic Day by starting a discussion among invited speakers. So now let's start this 20-minute discussion on is logic exceptional? And I believe Jean-Yves wants to answer at least some of these questions.
Okay, I apologize and leave to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll meet again. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't have many things to say. I mean, I will not comment So the presentation of everybody, I think all the presentation were interesting. Just make maybe a small comment about what Maria was saying about the methodology, because she was saying that the idea is that the methodology of logic is in some sense the same as in other science. It's true, it's, until some point, because in fact, logic itself is methodology. You know, there is a tradition of logic and methodology of science. You know, these two things were associated in the Polish school, and before by Descartes, by Blaise Pascal. So the logic itself is a way to develop and think, reflecting on the methodology. So that's, I think that's the difference. Even if logic also as a methodology in some sense similar to other science, it's different in the sense that itself, logic itself is reflecting on the methodology. So that will be my comments, and that's it. So if all people.
Okay, let me say a word, if I may.
Of course.
I think Jan Walensky was closest to my position. He said, Poland is exceptional. And I agree. But then France is exceptional as well. And the US and Russia and Ukraine is surely exceptional, especially these days. And Iran and Israel. So the situation is very similar with the sciences. Of course, logic is exceptional. But I disagree with our Hungarian friends that mathematics reduces to logic. And I surely disagree that physics reduces to logic. The last 8 or so years I'm working in quantum physics, and it definitely does reduce to logic. It's similar like engineering doesn't reduce to mathematics. So when I was work at Microsoft, you come across a problem, and in principle, maybe mathematics can solve it. But there's a Russian saying, a clever guy doesn't go across a mountain, he goes around it. And that's what you do in industry. You try to find engineering solution. Let's see, I promised to mention why mathematics is exceptional. To me, mathematics is exceptional because it's not obvious what does it study. Okay, logic studies reasoning. Okay, physics studies elementary particles and atoms. Physics studies, chemistry studies molecules. But what does mathematics study? So there is this somewhat artificial world, and when you adjust to it, it seems natural. I want to tell you my story from my school days. So I remember a teacher was explaining that these two triangles are congruent. And she said, in order to show that they're congruent, let's take a third triangle. And I started to worry, where does she take this third triangle from? So it was a very hard time soon after Second World War. Everything was in short supply. I was staying in bread lines for hours. Now, how suddenly these triangles are just available, go and take it. So I asked her, where do we take this third triangle from? And suddenly every student looks at her, because before I think I was the only one who followed what she was saying, because they sensed that she is not sure what to say. And indeed, it took her a few seconds to find what to say, and she said to me, shut up. So, but what I wanted to say that it's not obvious what this mathematical world is and where it lives. So our world is, according to physics, and logic would be no help in that, is possibly completely finite. but certainly mathematical world is infinite. Okay, I'll stop with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you, can I ask to Professor
But now we will have still, I will give voice to Jan Woleński because now we will have still discussion among speakers and later you will first ask in the third part.
about
Okay?
this position.
Okay, I think that I found a peculiarity or exceptionality of logic. You know, Hume's principle, but not this used by neologicists like Crispin Wright, but about relation between is and ought. According to Hume principle, normative statements don't follow from purely descriptive. So you cannot derive any moral norms from, for example, description of the world, which doesn't contain any normatives either. There is one exception, namely in deontic logic, logical, if you consider logic as normative, so the sentence OT, it should be the T, where T is a tautology, follows from T or any other sentence. It is interesting because we don't know any other modality except logical modality, which behaves in this way. It is a theorem of deontic logic that such connection is simply valid. And I think that this is a counterpart for universality of logic. So it doesn't mean that classical logic is exceptional and must be reserved. This is another story, plurality of logic. Every logic which satisfies, I repeat, some general conditions concerning consequence operation behaves in the same role. This is also, I remember the Jako Hintika once wrote a paper on analytic sentences, and he said that every conceptual system must be overstructured on some set of analytic sentences, that it is required by a stability of our conceptual systems. I think that the role of logic is still much more fundamental than typical analytic sentences. It justifies what Hajnal said about possibility of or role of logic in organizing science. But of course, this is rather a philosophical point, because I don't know whether all physicists will agree that physics should be axiomatized. I have several colleagues, professors of physics, who say, no, this is philosophers or logicians made that we should axiomatize physical theories. That is, of course, a perennial controversy which never will solve it. I think the same is in mathematics. The role of logic in this, in the case of Bourbaki of Poincaré was completely different than in the case of Hilbert, omitting such philosophical minds like Russell, for example. The same in Poland. Sierpiński was a fan of logic, but for Banach, logic was something, interesting, but rather marginal. So it is a continuum, so to speak, of attitudes of mathematicians to logic. For example, mathematicians in Krakow before war were absolutely against logic and set theory. There was a big controversy between Sierpiński and Zaremba, even animosity. So this sociological, psychological fact, and I think that we must know that and recognize. So some people are fans of logic, other not. I, for example, I am a lawyer from my first education. I think that logic is important for the law, but if you look at Polish practice these days, so law is full of gaps, contradictions, and so on. And it, of course, make ruling quite easy, because from contradictory law, you can derive any obligation, any right, and so on. However, please convince our politicians that this is very dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give voice to María, please.
Thank you again. And I wanted to follow the intuition that which was the main question of which was, if any, the relation between logic and science such as physics, especially fundamental physics. And what I wanted to say is that even though in Bertrand Russell's philosophy, for instance, the debate between the exceptionality or the anti-exceptionality of logic, it's not so as explicit as it is in Quine's work, for instance. It is a very peculiar relation that is the one that is proposed there, and the one that has been followed by metaphysicians in the later decades. And so the relation mainly is that fundamental physics, mathematics, and logic were very close in order to provide us with the main structure of reality. So even if we say that the epistemology of logic might be more, in a sense, universal than the one that is related to mathematics, and especially the one that is associated to physics, one can say that when these three disciplines are combined, they can shed light on which should be the main elements of reality that we should commit to. And so the intuition is that, well, physics provide us with insights about which is the ontology, for instance. Logic and mathematics provide us the relations between the ontological elements that we have already highlighted. And so when we think about this, maybe we can say something stronger than only that if there is a continuum between sciences and logic, it should be methodological. One can say that there are certain views that would commit to the fact that even if the methodological continuum is not so clear, there is a stronger continuum which is associated to the structure of the world. And that is, it's basic, it's necessary for understanding the reality that we live in. And so, as I was saying, this is a view that one can relate to Bertrand Russell at the beginning of last century, but also one can find in the strongest metaphysicians' views about the world, and especially the naturalized metaphysics about science. And so maybe this is something that we can all think about in the further section of the Q&A. And I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So do we have question, comments from invited speakers?
I would like to make a comment about what Yuri Gurevich was saying, and other people, about this analogy about exceptionality and this analogy with different countries. So there are many countries in the world, we know, and so. And then we have something like United Nations. And as we know, UNESCO is part of United Nations. It's a cultural branch of United Nations. So the United Nations is not one country among the other countries. So we can say that United Nations is exceptional in this sense. And also there is no reduction there is not the idea to reduce each country to United Nations. So I make this analogy. So my idea is that logic is something like that, like United Nations, that we want to unify. It's not my personal idea, because this was already the idea of in the first half of the 20th century, people using logic to unify the different science in the Warsaw School, and also with the Vienna Circle. So there was the idea of unity of science, and logic was fundamental for that. So if we consider logic as unifying all the different science, it's not a science among others. It's also, in one sense, it is a science, but also it's unifying all the different science. So it's more like at the level of United Nations. And so we are glad that now logic is part of United Nations, because we have the World Logic Day.
Can I reply? So this seems to me a very imperialist view of logic. And I am, of course, very much patriot of logic. But in fact, the logic we speak, which is deductive logic, in real world, you can print 3-step argument, and most people will correct argument logically, and people will not buy it. Why? Because in normal life, except for mathematics, deduction plays very little role.
Yeah.
In sciences, induction plays much bigger role. Probabilistic reasoning, Bayesian reasoning, is much more important for scientific purposes. The fact whether logic is a science, let me quote now. Somebody replied to me that Bourbaki said that mathematics is about about structures. Well, I disagree with Bourbaki. Not many people can read Bourbaki or want to read Bourbaki. By the way, the chief Bourbakist, I forgot what his name, was extremely anti-logic and very ignorant, and very ignorant of what actually mathematical logic is. So the authority of Bourbaki, here is an authority which is much bigger authority for me, is Richard Feynman. So he has this famous lectures in logic, 3 huge volumes. And in the beginning, he discusses lectures on physics. And in the beginning of the lectures, he discusses neighbors of physics. And who are those neighbors? Neighboring sciences. And he says, and he lists the following neighboring sciences: astronomy, biology, all kinds of sciences. And then a bunch of science, maybe a dozen, but not mathematics. And he aware of this, and he says to my friend mathematician, don't be offended, because mathematics is not science, he says. For him, science is a nature of sciences. So mathematics is not natural science. And then he says to mathematician, but again, don't be offended, because not everything which is good is science. Love isn't. So that's his argument. So certainly mathematics is not natural science, let alone logic. And deduction plays in physics or in tiny role. Of course, it's important. But the whole theoretical physics is only a small part of physics. Physics is very different. It's easy to say sitting in philosophical chair and see the world philosophically, but the world is very different. Let me see. I think to begin with, it would be good for logicians to develop a meaningful theory of how to deal with induction. You know, Popper had this principle of falsifiability. you can argue with this. And of course, logic can contribute. If you think about falsifiability principle, it only applies to universal statements, because you cannot prove universal statements by examples, but you can disprove it by example. So if your theory is existential, then falsifiability is impossible. So the form of the theory plays a role, and logic can play a role, but we better know what exactly our strengths and what our weaknesses are. The logic imperialism, with all my sympathies, probably will not take us too far. End of speech.
Thank you very much. And István and Hajnal, please.
So, I and my colleague Hajnal Andreka would like to make a point here.
So we don't know how to raise our hands. I know there is a button there, but I don't know. I didn't find it. Sorry.
Okay.
So first, we didn't say that mathematics can be reduced to logic. We didn't want to say it. We said that mathematics is based on logic, and that doesn't mean that it is reduced to logic. Like life on Earth is based on carbon. We are carbon-based bipeds. It doesn't mean that being carbon-based bipeds is everything about it. It doesn't mean that life can be reduced to being carbon-based. But it's clear that there is a very close first order logic is, if you want to know what really first order logic is, then you formalize it in set theory. That it is what happened. We just said that there is a very close relationship with the two. I think it's not the second. We think that logic is much more than making deduction. One should look at logic much more broadly than just saying that we derive true statements from two statements. That's too narrow a view about logic. Logic is just any manipulation about truth, about meaning, about information stored in the way.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. And now we will pass to a general discussion, but let me give a voice to Maria. She asked for a question in comment, please.
Yes, maybe this helps to bridge the previous discussion of the speakers to the one with the public. And what I had in mind is that maybe we are talking about discovery, not explicitly, right? So if we want to look at the chat, there are different intuitions about which is the object of logic. And well, in the case of physics, chemistry, biology, and all these disciplines, even mathematics, we have strong intuitions about which is the nature of the object that we are discovering through these sciences. It seems that for the case of logic, the object is not clear. So if we go back to Jean-Yves' reply on the United Nations example and what logic is in that sense, it seems that if the analogy is quite correct, then logic is something that we are building more than something that we are discovering. As United Nations is something that we build because we have certain needs, and maybe it's a similar thing that is happening in logic, and that's the reason why we can incorporate many different objects into the study of logic, as we cannot incorporate many different objects or natures into the study of physics, for instance. But this is only an intuition that maybe we can recover in the following Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much. And I saw that it was Anka Pascu, who wanted to ask question in.
No,
Please.
just thank you. I answered by writing, writing to
In
some
chat.
people's Professor Gurevich. I answered to Professor, I don't remember his name. He disagreed with Bourbakist group. Yes, we right to disagree with him, but don't forget that it was end of 60. Now the world is more complex and the logic begin to be more complex also. I was going to write, but I don't finished. Thank to all of you for your talks, especially to Jean-Yves for his great talk about exceptionality of logic. And I remember the motto of Fred Somers in Fred Somers' book. Fred Somers was a professor in Columbia University in linguistics. The book appeared in 1989. And the motto was, there is as much truth in beauty, there is beauty in truth. So I ask myself and I ask you if the three pairs of human values, logic, ethic, and aesthetic are truth, false, beautiful, ugly, just, unjust. It's yours to think. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I see there are some questions already discussion in the chat, but let me give voice to Jan and then we'll proceed to questions from chat. Jan, please.
Who?
Yeah, you please.
Okay, so I have no question, but I have a good anecdote about logicians. Probably some of you knew Roman Srecko, a Polish logician from first from Poznań, then from Warsaw. And Srecko told me following story: just after war, when he was a young assistant, he was sent by Dukevich to railway station to pick up Hugo Steinhaus, a famous Polish mathematician who came to Polish Philosophical Society. With, he delivered, had to deliver a talk. And Srecko didn't know, sorry, Steinhaus didn't know. Srecko, who are you? Oh, I am a logician. He was very proud. Ah, you are a logician. Okay, so I tell the following story. You know, there's a biologist, very proud. I am a great scientist, and he says that to a chemist. The chemist says, no, you are not a scientist because we explain what biology is, and biology is not a science. We can smile about you and so on. Then physicist comes and says that, and smiles of chemist, you are not a scientist, you are something like cooking, but physics explains everything what chemistry does. And then comes mathematician and oh, I am very ironic about you. Physics is a joke, mathematics is a real science because we investigate structures and so on, so on. And then Steinhaus says, and then comes a logician. And he says, we are great, the greatest scientists. And you know, my young men of logicians smile everybody. By the way, Steinhaus belonged to Lvov-Lemberg Mathematical School, which was a branch of Polish Mathematical School, but not so involved in foundations of mathematics like Warsaw Group. So Banach and Steinhaus belong to the same company. So it's once again an example of very different relations of mathematicians, great mathematicians to logic. I don't agree, but I am rather with Andreka, so.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I see that we have a discussion in chat, but if someone wants to ask the question directly, yeah, because I see that you have already answered many questions. So I see Zeno Tufano, see?
Yes,
yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yes,
No?
I can hear you.
I'm not a logician, I'm a scientist. So I wanted to know, is there something like progress in logic, like breakthroughs? And can we define something as different logical theories than which progress in time, as we see in science? For example, in physics, we see classical physics, quantum physics. Can you define this, or is logic something circular, more or less like different currents in politics? I don't know. This is an open question. Thank you.
Well, I will try to answer. I think it's clear that there is a lot of progress in logic. I'm talking about logic as a science. Then what is progressing? You know, what is progressing? It's progressing in the sense that the theories in logic, the systems are changing all the time. There are new systems being developed. You know, nowadays there is hundreds of systems of logic, so new systems of logic every day. And the theories at the metalogical level also there was a great progress. The way to understand how this system are constructing. So model theory or proof theory nowadays it's completely different than proof theory at the beginning of the century. I think Peter Schroeder was there at some point. Maybe he could say a few things about that. But it's clear that proof theory, just take one example. Proof theory nowadays, it's completely different than how it was 100 years ago. So I think there is no doubt about the progress of logic, but it's like any science in this sense. It's true that at some point, everybody knows the famous declaration of Kant in the preface of the Critique of Pure Reason that logic was it was finished and so on. But you know that nobody has this idea nowadays.
Thank you.
May I get a different point of view?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Logic was quite stale for centuries. It was Aristotelian logic. And then there was a crisis of foundations of mathematics. And suddenly logic, thanks to people like Russell and others, was thrown in the center of sciences. All the best people, you know, Hilbert did logic, von Neumann, and of course, bona fide logicians like Gödel.
Yuri.
So this was by far the best time for logic. This was the golden age of logic. We have downhill journey ever since. And maybe this is a normal. Each science has a sort of golden age, and it's like with human life. In fact, I wrote recently a paper complaining that logic became so much less foundational. So, of course, progress is made, but I think lately the progress is mostly incremental. And let me also, since Jan Walensky spoke about Polish logicians, I have one story too, related to one Polish logician, namely Leśniewski. So he had an interesting relation with von Neumann. So, you know, von Neumann was a kind of genius. When he died, about 20 people became #1 in their respective specialties. But he started, I don't know, but certainly he became known first as a logician. And he had the idea to compete with set approach and do everything not with sets, but with functions. So he created this, he wrote a big work on foundations of mathematics, starting from the notion of function. And Leśniewski found an error and wrote to him. Von Neumann was much annoyed, but agreed it was an error. He corrected, but you know, he was a great man. He did many things at once. He was not so pedantic. So he corrected, but Leśniewski found an error in the correction. So von Neumann made a next move, next correction, and then it was up to Leśniewski. But at this point, Leśniewski died, and that was the end of the story. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Jean-Yves, do we still have some time for questions or?
Well, if someone maybe a last question, if someone wants to make a last question.
Okay, so please raise your hand because I see that in chat you are already answered many of these questions. So
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I have been following the universal logic here for some time and got the feeling that we have something interesting going on here. But one thing is unclear, and to me a very intriguing question actually, that what do you need to go from to get a logic and not only a theory of something? I'll give you an example of what I mean. When we go from first order logic, for instance, and to arithmetic, do we have a logic then of arithmetic? Can we see arithmetic? We are manipulating expressions there too as a logic, or can we not? If we cannot, then what is it that makes arithmetic not a logic? But for instance, we have deontic logic. So as we already mentioned here, that we see as a logic because it has to do with something else than numbers, namely deontic notions. Can somebody answer what is the crucial thing when we go from a theory about something to logic?
May I say something?
Yes,
yes.
please.
So, as I said, I am a philosopher of science, and I would try to provide a response from the philosophy of science. So something that it's very characteristic between, to distinguish between methodology and a scientific theory is that, well, we can say that logic, for instance, is a good methodology for analyzing problems in mathematics and other sciences. We can also say that there are theories of logic once we can, first of all, provide the explanations in terms of the basic notions of that theory of logic. So as you were saying, model logic, for instance, you take the case of model logic and you try to provide explanations more than just to use the tool to analyze other problems, then that would mean that you have the ability of identifying which are the basic notions of the theory and how they relate to one another and how they might have causal connections or any other type of explanatory connections. And once you have that, you can still be using model logic as a methodology for analysis of other scientific problems or other problems within logic. But if you have clarity about which are the foundations of that methodology, and also you can provide explanations and maybe promote understanding of what modality is, for instance, then in that case, you wouldn't be talking about the applicability of model logic, but the theory of model logic. So that wouldn't be only metaphysics, for instance. If you apply model logic to analyze modality in the metaphysical realm, that wouldn't be just that. That would be a scientific theory in a sense. So the same with every theory of logic that you might have a particular paraconsistent view on logic. If you can provide explanations, then it's not only the applicability of logic for analyzing inconsistencies, but it's a scientific theory, or at least we can have that impression.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think example that you chose, arithmetic, is especially inappropriate for logic. Arithmetic is not recursively enumerable. So in the best of worlds, the logic axiomatics doesn't allow you to reduce all truths about arithmetic. As a working number theorist, logic is of no use to you. So logic and arithmetic are very different subjects. People who do arithmetic, who live that, for example, classical analysis is much more relevant to proving theorems in number theory. By number theory, I mean integers. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So
thank you. That was also a good answer, but still I'm somewhat unclear about the reason actually why certain theories are or would you say that if a theory is can be treated as recursive with recursive methods being fully computable, then it is can be made into a logical seen as a logic, otherwise not?
No, I don't think so. So for example, there is a famous result of Tarski about decidability of certain equations. I don't want to get technical.
Yeah.
However, the best algorithms are double exponential for that theory. So instead, in practical programming, in a theory of programming, Pressburger arithmetic is used a lot, because not only is decidable, but it is easily decidable. It is feasible. And so in practical program verification, Pressburger arithmetic is super important. One of the several, there are several such theories. Theory of arrays is another example, which allow you to do verification of some programs. Now, if there was a feasible algorithm for the Tarski theory, it will be a huge revolution in programming methodology. We don't have a really negative result yet, but very few people believe that there is a good, that there is a feasible algorithm for Tarski theory, unfortunately. So it's not only recursivity, just absence of recursivity, that then it just kills everything. But even presence of recursivity makes us closer to desirable goals only so much.
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry, because we are running out of time, and I saw that Koji Nakatu Gava, yes, sorry, had questions. So this is very last one, please.
Well, instead of giving specific questions, I would like to point out something lacking through the arguments and the reports here. That is, at the very beginning, the notion of reasoning was mentioned and emphasized. And then we have logic with capital L. Now, I'm pretty much in doubt with the universality of the reasoning. And that is, for me, a bit clear by looking at Indian religions and philosophy, and also Chinese logic and Chinese philosophy. And here, or even you can mention Chinese medicine. They are, all these things, Indian logic, Indian philosophy, Chinese logic, Chinese philosophy, whatever, are not under the universal notion of rationality. Rationality, in quotation, is too much shifted toward the tradition of Plato, or even Socrates, or even pre-Socratic period, and Plato and Aristotle, and that tradition. And I would like to see, I do not claim, but I would like to see more discussions about the universality of reasoning, or is there any other form or sort, any other kind of reasoning? That is what I would like to see, the more discussions going on. Now, and specific, the following comment is not related to, oh, okay, it may be. The first name is Yuri, and I can't pronounce your family name, so anyone can call me Koji, and I'll call, if I may, I'd like to call you Yuri. And you mentioned von Neumann. The reason why von Neumann adopted function in the foundation of set theory is, he stated, the notion of function is commonly used in mathematics, in the wider context of mathematics, and function is the central notion of mathematics. That's what he stated in 1927 paper. Now, and also one side issue here is the importance of course, from the mathematical point of view, the importance of something important is proved in that von Neumann's actually the thesis. And I'm still looking at, I'm trying to find the Hungarian original text of von Neumann, because the German translation is only the abbreviation, shorter version. Now, Oh, sorry, not an English translation, but the German translation of the von Neumann's thesis is the subset of the original Hungarian text. And the Hungarian text, there's an English collection of English papers from Frege to Gödel, and then the von Neumann's shorter version of von Neumann's paper appears. But then from Frege to Gödel, if you look at the reference section, there's a original title, Hungarian title of the thesis is misspelled. And and I tried to find the von Neumann's original thesis, but then the university where the thesis was submitted is disappeared or abolished, and then started as a new university. So if someone knows a fair about of the original Hungarian thesis, I would like to know. The reason why is that he might have, von Neumann might have a philosophical, well, this is unlikely, but von Neumann might have some arguments to why he chose function instead of bestimmt set, bestimmt determined set. Instead, von Neumann chose function. So I would like to know if von Neumann has other reasons besides wide use of function in mathematics. I wouldn't say that's philosophical, but he must have some other reasons besides the wide use of function in mathematics. Now, yeah, that's final comment is the paper contains the relative consistency of the axiom of foundation, and that is Gödel in that red booklet mentioned von Neumann's contribution to the idea of the constructive universe. But I stop here.
Let me say a word in defense of rationality. May I?
Yeah, okay, but the last comment. Okay.
Yeah, okay. There is something different about ancient Greece. Now, while I'm patriot of logic, I am no reason to be patriot of Greece particularly. But what was the difference between Greece and other cultures, Greek culture and other cultures, is that in many other cultures achieved much more sophistication. Say Babylon was much better in algebra, and Egypt was incredibly better, comparatively better than Greeks in geometry. However, in all those cultures, including Indian culture, so I spoke to so-called Indian logicians doing Indian logic. So in Indian logic, I believe also in Chinese logic, but I don't know anything about them, but certainly in ancient world, in Babylon, in Egypt, traditionally, it was between you and God or between you and nature. So, and the knowledge was something protected. You had to join a particular, I don't know how to call it today, monastery or something, and learn from the old people. And Greeks, in Greek, they went to their piazzas or whatever they call them, and they spoke to people, not to gods, to people, and they want to convince the people. And during this convincing, they developed rhetoric and logic and I forgot the word. You can play on the lower motivations of the crowd. So they developed convincing argument, convincing people right here, right now. And logic played a role in this. It was not the biggest fish, in the repertoire, but it was important. And it was the rational part. So the rationality of Greek culture was when people try to convince people rather than gods. That's what makes Russia, it's not so much, okay, Western civilization, of course, borrowed all that, but I think that's the main distinction. And if you try to convince God, then it would be hard to convince another God. But if you convince arbitrary group of people, you can convince another group of people. And that's the power of rational argument. By rational, I mean not necessarily deductive logic, but what all these disciplines like rhetoric. Well, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. So Borges said that the best thing that we owe to Greeks is the most important event in the universal history is the discovery of dialogue. Yeah, in this sense by Greek. Okay, but we run out of time. I know we have much more interesting questions, but we will have much more webinars. And let me thank to all the invited speakers for discussion and participants and these incredible contributions. Maria wanted to say sorry, but she also had to go to another event. And I also sent a link to Unilog. You are only invited to participate in the 7th World Congress and School on Universal Logic that will take place in Crete from 1st to 11th of April this year. And also thank you to Antia for the technical management and for all this question discussion. And the last word is to Jean-Yves. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everybody. Thank you, Katarzyna. So the next Unilog will take place in Greece, I mean in Crete especially, so which is the origin of the Greek civilization in Crete. So, one more good reason to go to Crete in April. It's a very nice place. And so today was the first session of webinar. It was an exceptional, if I may say, it's an exceptional session because it was a session for the World Logic Day. But then we will go on this year, like last year, we'll have 2 sessions every month, starting next month in February. Thank you. Hans, you want to say something?
Thank you all for joining. Happy World Logic Day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.